Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual professional development opportunity. My name is Joe Schmidt, and I'm the Social Studies Specialist for the Maine Department of Education. I'm happy and thrilled and excited to welcome today Beth Ratway, a researcher at the American Institute for Research. I think it's researcher. At the American Institute for Research, Beth is a friend and former, or still colleague of mine. She was the Social Studies Specialist for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction when I first got my license there. And we both share our Wisconsin Badger glasses throughout the sessions. Beth left the social studies field and is one of the leaders in kind of education research, and she continues to support my national organizations, not only in social studies instruction, but just educational work overall. I reached out to Beth to talk and ask about what are some ways she could help support Maine educators. And she asked, do you think people will need support in trying to figure out how to address the gap of students doing remote learning these past couple months? And I said, yes, absolutely. I think that is a topic people would be interested on. And considering there's almost 200 people here, I think we picked the right topic. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to one of the smartest, best people I know, one of the nicest, my friend, Beth Ratway.
Thanks, Joe. It's great. It was great to see everybody's faces, and I like to see some faces as I'm presenting. Good morning. It is morning here. Oh, it's still morning there. I'm in Wisconsin and working remotely, which I normally work remotely. I am not a researcher. I am a senior technical assistance provider. So it's really PD. I do a lot of PD. I do a lot of technical assistance. My work primarily resides around standards. So a lot of my work is helping states design high quality standards and implement them, and then working with districts on how to make sense of them and get them into the classroom and reach the kids and help the kids reach all standards. So I do that across different states. I did work at the Department of Public Instruction in Wisconsin. I was a teacher for 15 years prior to that, and then came to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction and then went to AIR. So that's kind of my background. I, as all of you probably are probably Zoom fatigued, overwhelmed by a lot of situations that are going on. And on top of that, my 18-year-old is graduating this week, virtually and kind of in person. So it's a little complicated these days. And I could see that also from all of your questions. This group, so we have elementary this morning, and then this afternoon I'm working with secondary. And we had a lot of elementary questions, and I'm not going to be able to address them all in an hour. I did try to put some links in here, but I will go back to those questions and any questions that you send Joe today, and try to do the best I can in terms of getting some resources, but also letting the Maine Department of Ed understand kind of what those themes are and maybe some of the work that they can do to help support you moving forward. So we're going to try to find the themes across questions and so on. A majority of the questions were really about how do I, make this manageable, and those are my two favorite words are manageable and meaningful, particularly in education. How is it that we can make sense of this yet not overwhelm ourselves because we're already overwhelmed? So what this is, it's just based on what I learned from working in the classroom, first of all. Second of all, some lessons learned from working with actually USVI teachers after the big hurricane, like how did they kind of make that transition? Because it's kind of similar in terms of they were closed for a very long time. How did they have these conversations? And it's also based off of the work that I do with standards, right? Implementation. So when there are new standards, there is a gap. And so some strategies that I've learned and I've worked with teachers on about how to really address that gap yet move forward and accelerate learning. Here we go there. Okay, so if you can go the first time here, we'll go in the chat box. What's worked well in the last 2 months? So what has worked well for you in the last 2 months of this adjustment time period? I'm just curious, and I'd like to start with hearing what you think has been working well. What can we learn from you all in terms of your experiences? Customizing learning, individualized learning, technology. Oh, office hours with kids. Yeah, I used to do that too. I really like that. I could tell you a story about that. Snail mail. Ooh, Seesaw, that's a good one. Yeah, these will be good to capture. So what I'll do is capture all of these. One-to-one video chats, Google. Yeah, this will be good to capture as it's recorded, and I'll put it into a document so you can see everybody's answers as well. Jamboard, Edpuzzle. See, there's really good things happening. we get bogged down with all the other things, but I really like to see what you're all doing. Oh, Zoom with teacher teams. Google Classroom, I've been using that as well. Ooh, I like Friday trivia. I'm trying to be creative. Yes, creative in order to survive. Oh yeah, the DOE Social Studies PD has been good. Virtual Spirit Week, yeah, we did that too. I like that. Some great ideas, and like I said, we'll capture these and put them in a document for you. You'll have access at the end. I'll have Joe send everybody a Google folder that'll have the PowerPoint in it. It'll have any of the handouts that I'm showing, or the forms that I'm showing in here. And then what I'll do is summarize these, as well as see if I can find some resources to some of your other questions as they come up. Good, thank you. Keep put them in there because we'll capture them. I really appreciate that. And I think we need to do more of that. And we need to do that with our kids too, right? It's kind of starting, hopefully, on a positive note or on a check-in, or trying to figure out what they're thinking and how they're feeling. And so I'm trying to push and work with teachers. I'm trying to gather information about what is working, because there's so many things not working. I'd like to step back and figure that out, and how can we learn from each other in that? So that's why I like asking that question first. So as I said, probably after this afternoon's meeting with the secondary, I will send everything you see in here. And so there's links in the PowerPoint that you can use and go back to. You can use the PowerPoint, you can do whatever you want. Anything that you hopefully will find useful as part of this presentation will be linked in this PowerPoint, as well as there'll be some other docs that you can use if you'd like moving forward. Okay, another chat box. So I like to start this way. How do you feel? Pick a dog, put a number in there. What are you feeling today? Yesterday I was a 4, definitely. Today I'm a little better, probably a 3. Lots of 1s, 3s, somewhere between a 1 and 2. No 5s. Maybe that'll be Friday. Again, just a simple kind of check-in, kind of, really good fun pictures. I have a Yoda one like this. So different pieces of how to do check-ins, and I can give you links where they have a lot of these different pieces as simple check-ins with folks, with your kids, with your colleagues, with parents, just to honor and get out how we feel in terms of the current situation or whatever's going on. So thank you for participating. Our quick agenda, welcome. We're doing the welcome now. I'll talk to you a little bit about minding the gap, and then we'll dig deeper into what am I talking about? What does that mean? And then we'll do some debriefing and next steps in terms of this work. And granted, it's only an hour, and you all had some amazing questions, but I can't. Most of those would be their own webinars. I tried to find some themes and adjusted the presentation to what your expectations were, but know that I couldn't get to everything. But we will try. Oops, sorry. So always having protocols for interaction, norms. It's hard. We're on Zoom all the time, but if we could all be present and participate, through the chat, either sending Joe questions, or when I ask questions, you can put them in the chat. Listen to understand. Be open to new ideas. Some of this is new. Some of it's actually not. It's just really good practice, and just rethinking it and kind of stepping back and being reflective. Be open to working outside of your comfort zone. Take some time to reflect. We have very little time as educators to reflect. Hopefully using some of this time to be reflective. We kept you muted, and then use the chat box to communicate. So back in the chat box, what are your concerns about returning? And we don't know how, at least here we don't know yet. Most states don't know how they're going to return yet, whether it's going to be hybrid or virtual, but in general, what are your concerns about returning, no matter what the format is? distance learning, self-contained, yeah, engagement, learning loss, not returning, student engagement, the trauma, a lot, regression, safety, SEL, a lot of SEL. Yeah, getting family and parents engaged. It's been a struggle for a lot of folks. And it's the situation as well, and the trauma and all those different components. Building trust, reconnecting. Yeah, they are going to be angry and scared. We're all angry and scared, and it's really hard. Like, we have to honor that. And I know one of the questions that we got earlier was, how can we focus on SEL more than content? And I think that that's a really good question. And I think that's something we need to think about. Yeah, the combination of who stays and who goes home or who comes, and building a classroom community. Yeah, some really good ideas. I'll capture these as well. And this will also inform anything kind of moving forward and seeing how the resources we can find for you to help with these concerns. They're real concerns. Your kids are going to have concerns. Your parents are going to have concerns. Everybody is going to have concerns, and we need to put those out on the table as well. And it's important. And I know some of the questions that you had were really based on concerns about interventions, about special needs, about coming back, about not coming back. So I thank you for putting all those questions in there in these comments. My mantra. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but these are questions that are worth thinking about. I know this is the reality right now in terms of trying to figure out how we're going to go back, and how we're going to get the kiddos to move forward, and how do we support them in all different ways. And you had lots of really great questions. And those are things that we need to think about. But as I said, I won't be able to get to all of them, but I'll get to as much as I can, hopefully, and give you resources, and then we'll reflect back and look at some of the things where my gaps are in terms of that, and get you some more resources as well. So this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. So I took all your questions and I put them just from this session and put them into a word cloud. I used Wordle. And so what you can do if you've never used it or any type of word cloud activity, you just put all the text in, and then the more the word is in that document, the bigger it is. So obviously we're all concerned about students, which is a really good thing to ground ourselves in. It's the students. And then you see some other really good words: gaps, engage, assessments, support, time, needs, all these different components. So I thought it was interesting just to take all of your questions and put them into a visual to help us start thinking about, what are we all talking about? What kind of questions are we asking? And really the focus, as you can see, is about students. So I'd like us to keep that focus as we think through this and go through this webinar. It's about the students and how do we support the students. Our goals, they're to explore strategies to return to school manageable and meaningful, understand how to clearly identify non-negotiables for learning, review strategies to identify prior learning needs. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about pre-assessments. That was my big aha when I was teaching, the pre-assessment piece. So we'll talk about that. And then how to adjust learning plans to ensure all students are engaged in meaningful learning experiences. And how do we do that? And we're learning differently now. We're having to become a little bit more individualized, and how can we use technology to support individualized learning? I think we're all learning a lot about that. So our question for today, the main question that we're really focusing on, is how do we use reflective practice strategies to meet the needs of all Maine students? So how do we use that? We know reflective practice. We don't obviously have a lot of time to do that. And we've been engaged in processes and procedures to be reflective practitioners. How do we revisit that to mind this gap? These should look familiar. If you've ever done a PLC, if you've ever read any DeFore's work, these are his similar questions. And I think going back to these questions to better understand the gap, and going back to asking yourselves these questions either individually or as teams, can really help you focus in on what's important. What do you want students to know and be able to do? How will you know they learned it? That's the assessment piece. How are you going to get them there? The learning plans. And then how do we respond? have to close this. Oops. Let me close this. Okay. How do we respond when some students don't learn, which we're finding right now? They aren't either attending the virtual learning and so on. What do we do for that? And how do we extend learning experiences? And how can we move students forward that already know information or that are proficient? So I would promote, continue to ask these questions. This is how you can get at the gaps. It's always starting with that question: is what is it that you want all students to know and be able to do? Where do you find that? How do you identify that? And the one piece that I put in this work is, once you ask that question for your course or your grade, then you have to step back and ask yourself, particularly in this situation, so what prior learning do they need to be successful in my grade? Usually we try to rely on the grade before, like second grade, what they learned should build. We have learning progressions. You all have learning progressions in most of your standards, in your content standards. They build from one year to the next. Well, now we have that gap. So we need to be reflective and start asking the question about what prior learning do they need to be and get at what you want them to know and be able to do in your course or your grade level. And that's where minding the gap comes in. It really is kind of going back to those reflective questions. And so what I put together is just a process. It's like nothing new. It's what I've learned from practice, as I said before. It's what I've learned from working with teachers and districts and really being thoughtful. We've had gaps before, not like this, obviously, in this situation, but we do encounter gaps. We have kids coming in at all different levels all the time. How can we manage this? So what I can share with you is what I've learned from other teachers, what I've learned from my own experiences, and that's kind of where this information comes from. This is the process that I've taken teachers through and I've done myself, is to really kind of step back. And the main thing that we don't do enough is identify our why. Why do we do what we do? And really ground everything in that. And that's the questions that you sent me and the visual that I said, students were at the center, right? And so we need to kind of step back every so often and really identify the why. Why do you teach second grade? Why do you teach third grade? What is it? What is your purpose in terms of doing that? And always ground how you make decisions and how you ask all these other questions in that. So that's the most important thing. And then from there, you step back and you really try to identify what are those non-negotiables. And you can find those non-negotiables in most of your standards documents or national frameworks, and really thinking about what are these things that I need these kiddos to learn. And no matter what, all of these kids need to learn these 6 things. These are the most important things, and this is what it needs to be about. And then step back. And so if this is what I need to do with my second graders, then this is what they need to come to me with. And I need to know what they're coming to me with and what they aren't coming with. And that's where pre-assessments come into play. And then looking at those, and then based on those pre-assessments, then we think about and look at the data and say 80% of the kids already know this. So I can kind of move forward. The 20% of the kids, I could give some individualized learning or some readings or some resources for them to work from. But I could probably, let go of this topic or this area because 80% of the kids already know that. And so we're okay. And the 20% I'm definitely going to support and give some resources to. Whereas if it's like the other way around, 20% of the kids know this and 80% don't, maybe we need to keep this and kind of review it and put it into the curriculum, because we need this in order for them to move forward and in order to accelerate learning at all. So this is kind of the process that Minding the Gap focuses on. So we're just going to talk about each of the steps and give you some tools to think about it. Okay. So I have to get rid of the videos. Okay. He who has a why can endure any how. And that's why I always want us to step back. We very rarely, as I said, have the time to think about the why. Why is it so important for them to learn this? Or why is it I'm teaching this reading strategy? Or why is it that I'm doing this concept in math, and really thinking about what's the why for me, and then what's the why for the students, and how can I help them understand the importance of this and why it's important? And if we step back and think about that and center ourselves on that, then the how comes more naturally. You're all gifted teachers. We're all scrambling right now and trying to figure out and balance and do these hybrid approaches and things, but you're all in it for the right reason, and you're doing really good things. don't throw those out. But what this process does is kind of let you hone in on some of the really good things and what you need to do to move forward and what's really important. Just really stepping back. And when you get the PowerPoint, this has a link to a video. It's a really kind of good video about knowing your why. It's a comedian who does this. He's doing a TED Talk on YouTube, but he's doing a talk in front of a crowd, and he asks a guy to sing, and he sings the song, and then Amazing Grace, and then he said, so now, and he gives him a purpose. And he gives him the purpose, a different purpose or context. And then he sings it so much more emotionally. And it's because you step back and really think about the why. So it's a really good video, but there's a link to it when you get the PowerPoint that you can click on and see it. It's very interesting. So really stepping back, what do we do? What do we do? How do we do it? For whom do we do it? And why do we do it? What value is this? And really kind of being reflective and thoughtful about that. And really centering all of our work on that is the place to start. The next step, and this is I have a template of this in the Google folder that you'll get. It's just a Word template. And this is the process that goes, the circle process. It's just put in a linear worksheet to think through. And what I've worked with teachers on in terms of using this is how you have your normal unit planners. And you can keep your normal unit planners. You just put this as a reflective tool before you go into a unit. So we'll walk through this, but you identify the unit. We'll talk about the SEL focus, talk about the non-negotiables. So we'll talk about each of these and how to think about each of these, but I have a worksheet there for you. So say you're planning, you're doing your curriculum planning, or you have your units already. This is kind of just the top reflective part before you kind of go into your normal unit planning. You have to keep your units. There are some reflective processes you can go for your current units and your current learning. There are some things you can let go of that you'll identify from the pre-assessments. But then this is particularly for this situation that, it's not only the summer slide anymore. It's an additional 3 or 4 months. And so how can we be more thoughtful and reflective but still make it manageable? So this is kind of the top part of the unit planning, where we're really being thoughtful about what do they need to come in to get to this unit to begin with. And many of the questions, as well as the comments in the chat box, are about trauma and about SEL. I think it's more important than ever to really be thoughtful about your classroom environment. And that's really being reflective. That's those roots. Right? You can't just keep going on. You can't just keep going through content. You can't keep teaching math. You have to figure out where these kids are at, what they're thinking, and they're each going to be different. And how can you do different check-ins, even individually with students? So these links give you different strategies. The beauty is that there's some really good work around SEL. It was always not necessarily an addition, but it was like, okay, I have to get through this content. Here's my curriculum. And we don't think enough about SEL. And now it's so much more important than ever to start with that. How we structure our classrooms, what we ask kids about this work. CASEL, the last link, is a great organization, has tons of really good resources to think about it. You in Maine, let me see here, have an SEL focus. I mean, you have, social emotional learning. These are very common themes, and they come actually from the CASEL work. And there's some really good resources that you have in your own site. But what I propose to you is, as you're being reflective and really thinking about these gaps, the big gap is going to be SEL. And starting with that, every unit, and being thoughtful about maybe focusing on one of these areas in every unit may be your best bet in terms of moving forward. Do this. Got out of the thing. Hold on. Sorry. Technology. We love technology. So, as part of the templates, You pick your unit. So this, I am a former social studies teacher. So I did a social studies unit. And so the unit that I was thinking of is the role of citizens in Maine, which maybe in Maine might be a fourth grade unit. The parentheses underneath are the unit or the information that they would have had to have in a prior grade to be successful. So I'm just kind of keeping myself engaged in terms of, I know my unit is the roles of citizens in Maine. I'm fourth grade. This is what I need to do, but this is what they would have had to learn to understand the roles of citizen in Maine, which is the role of an individual in a community, which they would have learned in an earlier grade. But then my first question to myself is, what SEL focus am I going to have? And so when I was in the classroom, I started playing with this a little bit, and I would have an SEL focus. Every quarter, I'd ask a different question or have an SEL focus that would ask different questions about self-management or give them different strategies about self-management. In the entire unit, we'd always start with something about self-management. So I want you to think about picking an SEL focus for each unit and just doing some activities with them and doing check-ins and having them give the skills that they need, and honoring the students in terms of where they're coming in at. So that's why I'd like to start with an SEL focus, and I think it's so much more important now than it ever has been. And like I said, there are tons of wonderful resources here as a start, but there are tons of other resources that you can look at in terms of really thinking about what are simple strategies that check-ins, like the dog picture. That's an SEL strategy, right? Or asking questions or those types of things where, but this, putting it in this template really makes you focus on it. Okay, I'm going to focus on that for this unit and do these types of check-ins with kids. And then I'll do a different maybe focus, or I'll maybe focus on the same one. So I think it's really important to put it at the forefront. Because a lot of times it's kind of in the back. We set up our classrooms this way, we have classroom rules, we do these different things, but it just really needs to be at the forefront for us and for students. And then non-negotiables. So I did get some questions in terms of really thinking about what a lot of you are either asking about priority standards and those types of things. I like to call this non-negotiables, because what I see is I want to reflect on what are the non-negotiables. Every child needs to learn these. This is the basis of why I do what I do, and being reflective on that. I do go back to the standards often for that. I do go back to other documents and other things, really just kind of step back and think about what are those things that all students need to know and be able to do. What are those big buckets in terms of that? Some of your standards frameworks has those, some of them don't. But it's you being reflective as by yourself or as a second grade team, if you can, just to think about what's the purpose of second grade? And how do we get all these buckets in there, and how do we identify what those non-negotiables are? Particularly in elementary, it gets to be overwhelming sometimes, especially in the early grades, when you're teaching everything and you're responsible for everything. You could do the non-negotiables by content area. You could do them by a grade. It depends on how you're thinking and how you want to clarify the purpose of what you do. So you clarify the non-negotiables overall, and they're the same for the entire year. So for when I was teaching, I had six non-negotiables that all students had to be engaged in, and that was my purpose for getting them where they needed to be. They were just 6 things, and I reflected with them all the time on that. And that was my purpose. Those were my non-negotiables. Everything that I did built off of that. Most of it came from the standards. I know this is what my purpose is. This is what I have to do with this course or this grade. And so I just stepped back and did that. And so you could do that with your team. This is for your grade. So you're really still focusing on what you teach and your particular grade right now. And you don't have to delineate by discipline, as I said, but it depends on how you structure your classroom and what you feel about the non-negotiables and how can you identify them in each of the areas. If you do identify them in each of the areas, it could be an opportunity where when you list them like this, you see a similar concept and you're like, oh, then maybe I should focus on that concept and look at it through the lenses of the disciplines rather than just doing English this period and math this period and social studies every so often and science every so often. Maybe if I focus on inquiry then I can do lessons in each of these areas because inquiry is in each of these. It's expected in the standards of each of these 4 content areas. So trying to find that center spot, right? And I'm sure many of you have done that before, and that's what you do. But looking at the non-negotiables, there may be some opportunities to find some cross areas, whether it be between science and math, ELA and social studies, or all 4, trying to make your lives manageable. I mean, 4 content areas is a lot, plus all the other things that you have to do with intervention, everything, and what your expectations and time allotments are. But I ask you to go back to the non-negotiables, and if you have non-negotiables for social studies, see where they can be complemented in other areas as well, but they're really, you need to stick with those and not let them go, even though you have to do so much time here and so much time there. How can you bring them together? So that's why it's so important to come up with these non-negotiables to really determine maybe where they connect or where you have to do them separately, but they're really important for all students to move forward. So I'm filling out the template for you. So I'm going to take it each step. So the non-negotiables here that I found for this social studies course for this 4th grade are these pieces, and they come right out of the standards. We want clear, I really want them to be clear and effective communicators, self-directed lifelong learners, creative and practical problem solvers, responsible and involved citizens, integrative and informed thinkers. And then we have these big core concepts. This is my purpose. This is my purpose in social studies across the board, not just in 4th grade. So I always come back to this, like everything that I do, every decision that I make, no matter if it's a lesson, sorry, my dog, if it's a lesson, if it's a unit, if it's, giving feedback, this is my purpose. This is why I do what I do. And so I go back to this for every unit that I make, and these are the same non-negotiables for every unit. The next step is prior learning, and we do a lot. There's tons of different things that we've learned about for prior learning. And what they know, KWL charts, all the different pieces, and these are more important now than ever, is to step back and really think about, stay in your grade, right? Stay in your lane, figure out what you really want. You have your units, you have your learning that needs to happen in 4th grade. But in order for that to happen, what do they need to come to me with? What prior learning do they need to come to me with? So stepping back as a teacher and jotting those things down is really important. So you can look at the 3rd grade standards to see what prior learning might be. You can brainstorm it on your own. You can brainstorm it as a team. But I really think this is really important in terms of minding those gaps, is to think about prior knowledge. What is it that they need to know and be able to do to be able to engage in your 4th grade work? And so this is just some research, if you needed some, about prior knowledge and the importance of it, what they come with, and understanding what they come with and what they don't come with, and what misconceptions they come with, right? So it's really more important than ever. This is a tool that you can build off of to better understand the gaps that they're coming with in terms of being prepared to learn what you need to work on in your particular grade. Excuse me. Just those simple questions. What is it that students need to be able to know and do to be successful with the content and the strategies and the skills and everything that we need to engage them with in my grade? What is it that they need to have? And really be thoughtful about those, what prior learning they need. One way, this is only one way. You don't have to do it, but I would suggest it's a way, because the documents are there and you have strong standards documents. So I would say, to identify the prior learning needs, you ask yourself, what knowledge will students need to demonstrate the intended learning for this particular grade? What skills, what understandings, and how might they demonstrate that? And really go back to the standards. And like I said, if I'm focusing on 4th grade, I'm going to go back to just take a peek at the 3rd grade indicators and so on, and see kind of what they were supposed to come with, and just make a list of those things. What are the knowledge, skills, concepts that they should have worked on that will best prepare them for what I know they need to work on in my grade? So this is what I did for the 4th grade. This is the prior learning in order for them to understand how to be a citizen in Maine. They would have needed to engage with these concepts and skills prior to coming to me. And if they haven't, I really need to kind of think about these and try to figure out how to manage and work with them in my class in terms of my 4th grade. So I would say consequences, principles of rule of law, concept of punishment, respect for the law, all these different components are kind of understanding the community and citizens' role in the community and basic structure in order to really understand and go into what's happening as for citizens in Maine. They needed to have these big picture pieces and these concepts and skills. So once I did that, then what I do is I look at all of these prior learning pieces and then try to identify resources that are already out there, like that students can engage with. Right now, we're inundated with resources. It's good and bad. Information overload, and trying to cultivate them and try to figure out, your content specialists at the department are doing a wonderful job doing that for you. And there are other organizations that are doing that as well, but it can be overwhelming, particularly for elementary teachers, for all these different resources to help these kiddos move forward. But what I would do is now reflect back on the resources that you've been getting and connect them back to these, like what are some resources that students can engage in to understand the principle of rule of law? What are some resources that are out there to understand the concept of respect for the law? So I go back to my prior learning and identify the resources. And I'll tell you the purpose of this in a minute. You'll see. So I had some online resources, so they were online, but I also need like hard copy text types of things because we know the disparities in online pieces. So I wanted a little bit of both. So there's some readings, David Goes to School, Rules and Laws, King for a Day, The Big Umbrella. So those are some things that they could do without technology. And then there's some things they can do with technology. So I like to split it that way, especially now because we're getting resources in both areas and I want to capture that go back to the prior learning needed. So this is where you can really mind that gap, is doing these pre-assessments. I have pushed for pre-assessments forever because I think they're even more important than building common end of course assessments or end of grade assessments or end of unit assessments. Either working together or individually, really building these pre-assessments. What I learned from my classroom, it took me probably 7 years into teaching, was I actually gave a multiple choice test the second day of class, and it had like 6 questions per unit that I was going to teach. And so then it was the best way for me to manage my instruction, because then I would get back and like everybody knew this concept, so I didn't have to do this piece. Nobody knew this concept, so I had to do some more group learning. Half and half knew this and this, so then I could really strategize my instruction and my learning plans based on these pre-assessments. So I think what's really important about this process is that now that you've to understand what you really thought about what the prior learning is needed for them to be successful in your class, build your pre-assessments on these. Ask them questions about, or have them do activities about rule of law, law and order, respect for the law. So you get a picture, whether in any type of pre-assessment, so you can get a picture of, yeah, they do know this, or no, they aren't ready, so I do need to kind of step back and cover this. So the pre-assessment should be built on those prior learning pieces. And you could throw in questions about your current learning as well. You can do a little bit of both if you wanted to. You could do it like for a whole year. You could do a pre-assessment per unit. You could do a pre-assessment for a semester. Whatever fits in, what's not overwhelming for you, you choose that. But you build it off of those prior learning priorities. These are all different ways to check for understanding, and there's different strategies, and there's tons. It's not like you have to do a full-out test or quiz or anything. There's tons of different ways, and lots of links here about really thinking through how to check this prior learning piece. But you have to identify what that is first, and then create the prompts or create the questions or create the activities around those prior learning pieces, so it gives you that clear picture about what it is they're coming in with. So my pre-assessment strategy is part of this 4th grade piece, and I'm trying to figure out what they're coming to me with. I'm going to ask them to draw a picture showing what responsibilities they have in their communities. So if I look at a picture that a student's drawing and it shows me their responsibility, what they think are responsibilities they have in their community, I can see if they're ready then to have conversations about what a citizen's role is in Maine, specifically in the state of Maine, because that's my focus for 4th grade. But I really need to understand if they know anything about communities, or if they have a sense of it, or check their misconceptions. So I thought that maybe drawing a picture, I could see that and we could talk about it in terms of that. So that would be my pre-assessment strategy, to really do that. So it does not have to be huge but it has to be little nuggets that give you clear pictures into what students are bringing in. And then finally, we create learning experiences. So the resources now are connected to these learning experiences, right? So we did the pre-assessment, we know 80% know this, 20% don't, 80% don't know this, and 20% do. So what do I do with that? And that's where those resources, I can put them with the students, so I can use the resources now when those 20% that don't know, I can go back to the resources and say, hey, read this book. You know, the whole class doesn't have to do it. Let me get back to there. You read David Goes to School, you read Rule and Laws, and then that should give them some of the meat that they need for individualized instruction, right, for that 20%, but the 80% doesn't need to do that. So we can kind of manage it that way. And I'll show you some strategies to do that. But that's the role of the resources, is when you start creating learning experiences and you look at that pre-assessment data, it's really important, then you can use those resources to kind of fill in those gaps. Especially because you're finding more and more amazing resources out there. So this is where you make the decision about creating shared learning experiences versus individualized, right? We're really moving more towards individualized. We know that's really important, but the pre-assessment data can really give you some windows into shared, you know, what can we do as a class? What should we do as a class? 90% of the kids don't know this. We definitely need to step back and talk about it as a class and do some shared learning experiences. Again, if 10% don't know it, that's where we do a little bit more individualized learning. Or if 10% do know it and 90% don't, we still do some individualized learning experiences with those for extended learning opportunities. So there's different strategies. That's where the pre-assessment is so important. And it doesn't have to be complicated, but it can help you make and really create and help make good instructional decisions, particularly when I need to do group, when I need to do individualized, and so on. I have in here some links because we are in this online space. I thought I'd put some links in where you can do shared learning experiences with students, with kiddos. I know a lot of you are doing Google Classroom and Zoom. I just added some other ones that you might want to think about using. It's funny, the paper clickers one is, because if you can't afford clickers in your classroom, it's like you give them like colored note cards and then that's how they vote. They put up the color. It's so simple, but you could do it on Zoom too. There's different ways of doing different things, but these are just different tools. Some are, you know, online, and some are just thinking about how to do shared learning experiences or get shared feedback from individual students collaboratively in different ways. So those are just some resources for that. Individualized learning experiences. We've been finding some really cool individualized learning experience resources. And I know all of your state consultants are really putting together some great resources for parents to work with their kids at home, and you can use those for individualized learning experiences. These are a couple of really cool ones that you can click on and link to. The choice boards, so what Hawaii is doing right now is they have these online choice boards. And what they do is every week, they put out activities for every grade in every content area that they could be doing at home. You could use those same things for individualizing learning. In your pre-assessment, you saw this child didn't have this. Well, you could have a choice board. Go here, 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 based on your prior learning pieces. And there's so many out there, but the choice boards I think you'll really find exciting. And you can build your own choice boards, but I think the Hawaiian ones give you a good sampling, and it has literally daily strategies since we've been closed, since March 13th, well, we've been closed. Hawaii was the same. They started making these boards. They have them every week for every grade, for every subject area. It's really amazing. So that's a link as well. And then Kansas made a really cool partnership with their PBS, right? So we know technology is a problem. And it's a disparity in lots of areas. What PBS decided to do is they partner, or Kansas Department of Education partnered with PBS. They have resources out there, and they put daily, so the morning slot, I think it's 6 to 8, is all learning for elementary. And then 8 to 10, I think, is middle school. And 9 to 12 is high school. And so they have all based on the content standards, all based on the things that they can go in different videos. Again, you can use that later when you're teaching now in your classroom and try to find some resources. Go watch this if you find a gap, and trying to bring them back up to speed, or do it as a class. So there's some really good pieces here. Their sample learning menus, those are actually science-based, and that's from NSTA, and they talk about, you know, what students could be doing at home, what they should be doing at home with their parents. So those are just different really resources that I think you'll find beneficial, that are manageable to kind of beg, borrow, and steal from. So I step back to my 4th grade, and I know what I've done, my pre-assessment. I know what the gaps are. So now I know I need to really focus a little bit more with the whole class, because I found gaps in fairness, equality, and respect, that they didn't really get a sense of that. I didn't see that in that pre-assessment picture. I didn't see them seeing that as a role. So let's step back, and I will do some learning with them on that as a whole class, because they need more work in that area in order to be prepared to understand communities and citizens' role in Maine. So I realized that as part of the pre-assessment. And rules and laws. There were some gaps in learning around rules and laws. But I found that I saw in all of their pictures, a majority of the kids really understood the concept of authority and respecting authority. I had maybe 10 kids that didn't. So here's a reading and a really good book from the Center for Civic Education on that. I could have those kids do a study session on that, and my other kids moving them forward in some of these shared strategies. And then I can move forward with helping them understand what a citizen looks like in Maine and what the role of a citizen is in the state of Maine. And then this was a big question for all of you, and I don't have all the answers at all, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I know a lot of you talked about special ed, special needs, all the different pieces about interventions, everything that's, you know, in your world, and I understand that. And again, those would be day-long webinars that we do need to discuss. But what I tried to do based on your questions is give you some resources. So some questions were about English learners. So here are some like at-home strategies for the situation now, but also when you come back to your classroom, about engaging ELs in this work and trying to understand what they're coming to the table with. The beauty of special needs and EL students is that we have strategies we have IEPs, we have all these different things to individualize learning. So I feel like this process really helps with that, because if we look at what our prior learning is needed, and do pre-assessments, we'll clearly see the gaps in all of these pieces. And then we need to strategize how can we best meet the needs of each of these individual students that have these gaps coming forward. And this is where collaboration is key with your EL coordinators, with your special ed supporters and instructors, that as much as you can, try to collaborate around, hey, these are the prior learning that they need to be successful before they start engaging in the 4th grade content or 4th grade skills. Can you help me think about this, and how can we bring them up to speed as well? So that's where those partnerships, they are your best resource. And these are some links to high leverage practices for special ed. How do you think about collaboration? How do you think about assessment? So these are strategies that kind of correlate back to everything that I talked about earlier, but really focus on special education. And then these are some more resources for special ed, because there are a lot of questions about special ed. So they have some resource libraries, they have some intervention supports, and there's some really good resources here that you can work with as you're thinking and being thoughtful about meeting the needs. That first question is all students. How do I meet the needs? What do all students need to know and be able to do? So I like the center one. But what I suggest is taking it one step at a time. Really just kind of stepping back. I think the most powerful piece is that really understanding what those kiddos need to know and be able to do coming into your grade, adjusting. Once you realize and once you do those pre-assessments and figure out what those gaps are, there are other things from your grade that you can let go of and use the same process. You're like, what are those non-negotiables? What is it? And then if it doesn't fit those non-negotiables, you have to give yourself permission to let go of some of it. We all need to give ourselves some permission, but we need to do it thoughtfully. So thinking about those non-negotiables in your purpose are why we start there. The other piece is, please try as much as you can to collaborate for sanity. We can't do this alone. And the more you can collaborate with one person, with a team, with somebody, the better off you're going to be for many reasons, and we know that. And then what I'm going to put in the folder, I I put together a tool, and this is actually, it's for social studies, but you could use it in any situation, like you can tweak it. But what I've been working with teachers currently on is, you just finished 2 months of online teaching. And it goes back to that first question that I asked you. What on earth worked and what didn't work? So I just have questions. I have lesson implementation reflection questions. So you could use this summer, excuse me, and just kind of step back and say, okay, let me breathe. Let me get in the sunshine. Let me relax in the fresh Maine air. Okay, now let me reflect back on my experiences with my students. What went well? What didn't go well? Why? So there's specific questions in here about that, about content connections, which is where you tweak it a little bit for different content areas or grade levels. Student engagement questions. How do your students respond? I know some of you had mentioned, like, how do I get them to show up for Zoom meetings? I have some resources in there. You can't guarantee it. It's just like they're also in class not paying attention. So how do we, get them engaged? And that was, I know, brought up a lot as well. Excuse me. And then the classroom environment. That's a lot of SEL work. So these are questions where you're able to provide students opportunity to regulate themselves through goal setting and motivation. So just some questions to be reflective about what worked and what didn't work in terms of this last couple months. And you can use this all the time. But right now, we need to step back. We need to take a little time. We need to breathe. And then we need to step back and say, hey, this worked really well. Maybe I should continue using this if we are face-to-face or virtual or hybrid, however we are. I don't want to lose this. So that's what this tool is for. And so that's my reflective piece. So that'll be in the folder, and you can link it here, but it'll be also in the folder. What I put on here are some answers, trying to give you resources to some of your other questions that you had asked. How do we make online learning engaging? So there are a lot of questions on that. So there's some resources there. Strategies to engage students in Zoom. That's another question. There are some early childhood questions, and you have a great early childhood team that has a lot of resources, and we're going to be working with them as well to think through some more supports for the little ones. How do we continue to engage the little ones? How do we transition? How do we have common conversations between teachers to really support these kiddos moving forward? And then accommodations and interventions for remote learning is in there, and how to maintain a focus on equity, whether it's remote, whether it's face-to-face, but how do you step back and continue to think about equity, and how do you give equitable learning experiences if you are still remote? How do you balance that with kids that don't have access, and how do you think about that moving forward? And then, so I go back to these same links that I talked about earlier for individualized piece. We usually don't have a lot of access to our kids in the summer. But maybe administrators have access to parents. I'm assuming, have a lot more access to parents these days. These are some tools that your administrators, or you even, if you have access to the parent emails, can send to them and say, hey, this summer, have your kids engage in some of these things. I'm not saying every day, but here's some things that if you want them prepared to come to us next year, here's some great resources. Watch this PBS video. Watch, do this science experiment. So they're really kind of, and there's one, the daily dues are science as well. But you could frame that in an English language arts piece too, like daily dues. So they're really neat things that maybe you or principals could give out to parents and suggest. It's going to be hit or miss. We all know that. Let's be real. But if parents, they've been working with their kids, hopefully these last couple months, maybe they would want to continue it throughout the summer and try to get them ready for fourth grade or for third grade. And somebody did ask about communicating with parents. I think, even maybe a weekly email that has one strategy for each content area, or one strategy that's going to help kids, or a couple different strategies, and just focus like every week, just make it manageable for them, and that you're continuing to communicate with them, and telling them how this is going to get their kids ready for coming in and being prepared for the next year. That is what I have, and I hope you got little nuggets of information. I appreciate your time. It's hard for me. I'm a very I'm a very engaged, like I like to be engaged with my audience. And it's very hard for me to mute everybody, but we had almost 300 people sign up for it. So I'm hoping that you got a little nugget. And yes, the PowerPoint will be sent. And this will be recorded and posted, but the PowerPoint and the resources will definitely be sent to you. But I'm gonna wait till after I'm gonna do one at 1 your time. So I'm gonna do it for secondary, so I'll do that too. So yeah, I tried, it was jam-packed. But thank you very much for coming and spending your valuable time with this topic. And thank you for thinking about it. And thank you for asking really thoughtful questions. It was very helpful in helping me put this together. I appreciate it. I'll look at some of these questions as we go forward and also send you answers. So thank you so much. Enjoy. Hopefully you have sunshine like we do. If you don't, you will tomorrow, because I always send it your way. We're, like 1 day ahead of you. So you will be having sunshine tomorrow. All right. Thank you so much for everything.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. On behalf of everybody, I'd like to say thank you for taking some time to share your expertise with us.
Thanks.